Ooh, there we go.
We're off.
We're off. All right. Any questions before we begin? Our presenter is Janet. I'm going to make you the star of the show here.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'm glad you're here. I'm going to talk a little bit to tell you some personal news. It's Phil and I's first wedding anniversary today.
Oh,
so
today.
It's today.
Oh.
So Marin married us this time last year at Garber Church. And we were in lockdown, if you all remember. So we had a wedding party with masks on. This is a strange photograph. And then, so my philosophy now is that every 1 year we're married counts as 10 because of our age. So, anyway, good morning. And just keep me in silent prayer as I do this today. This is a difficult topic, but it's also very pertinent right now. I'm reading about all kinds of things in the newspapers about social justice, Black Lives Matter, CRT, critical race theory. And Phil and I start the morning often with very good discussions. So our discussion one morning with breakfast with Jan and Phil was, hey, honey, what does woke mean? So we came up with several solutions. And then we decided that one of the solutions we came up with was actually politically incorrect. So in the book, and this book is Social Justice, Why Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice. It's 202 pages long. Full of information. Some of it I have absorbed, and I hope you will take a chance to read it too when you can. So we looked up the Oxford Dictionary for the meaning of woke, and we came up with, according to the dictionary, is defined as well-informed, up-to-date, and now it's chiefly alert to racial and social discrimination and injustice. Okay, fine. The Old English Dictionary by the mid-20th century, woke had been extended figuratively to refer to being aware of or well-informed in a political or cultural sense. And the Urban Dictionary adds, being woke means being aware, knowing what's going on in the community, which I think is probably where it is more today, related to racism and social justice. So to summarize, woke means a person who is consciously awake. And I had to really think about that definition too. I said, can you be consciously unawake? Can you unconsciously be awake? Anyways, never mind. So then we started, as we talked about it, we came up with political correctness, and we talked about that. And are we being politically correct? Do we need to be political? Why should we be politically correct? So anyway, political correctness at hand, the speech codes, written or unwritten, wielded to silence opposing viewpoints, empower or humiliate those who hold them, often by public shaming, and that's quite a bit of that's been going on lately. Fines, the loss of employment or reputation, we have seen that going on, mandatory re-education under the guise of sensitivity training. And it's a precursor to policies and laws that ban unacceptable viewpoints and anyone with the temerity to espouse them. So, I'm going to give you a history lesson. I love history. I think we learn from it. We need to learn from it. So I'm taking you back to the Magna Carta, the Great Charter of England. Under King John, now how English school children remember the date of the Magna Carta, it's lunchtime, 12:15. That was the year, June 15th from 12:15. Under a threat of civil war, issues were raised, and literally King John was forced to sign the Magna Carta, though he didn't really want to. Anyway, several additions and changes were made to it in 2016, 2017, and 1225. Excuse me, I got to calm down. The Magna Carta declared the sovereignty to be subject to the rule of law and liberties held by free men. Now, this is 1215. free men were white men, and women did not have the right. A whole group of, I think, property owners, it also meant property owners. These were the barons. So but it provided the foundation for individual rights in Anglo-American jurisprudence. So we gather a lot of this. So the influence of the Magna Carta comes not from its expression of a feudal relationship between a lord and master or subject, but its more general clauses in which every generation from then on can see its own protection. So there's still parts of it. The right to petition, we're all familiar with that. That was written in there. Habeas corpus was written into that. Due process was written into the Magna Carta, and which was a forerunner for Parliament and the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution and the US Bill of Rights. So it is living today in very different forms. The funny thing about it, when King John, after I don't know how long, was subject to the rules of Magna Carta, he didn't like them very much. So he appealed to the Pope, who then reversed it and struck it down. So, but it came back under Henry III. And so there we are. We do have in American jurisprudence a lot of biblical laws that are embedded into the Magna Carta, which have followed down to our Constitution. And even if you refer to the Ten Commandments, you know, there's a solid basis for British common law, which I'm going to. But anyway, a little history here. When the colonists left for the New World, the English colonists left the New World, they brought their royal charters with them. The Massachusetts Bay Company charter stated that colonists would have and enjoyed all the liberties and immunities of free and natural subjects. And the Virginia Charter of 1606, which was largely drafted by Sir Edward Coke. And if you're a law student, you'll know who he is. His name comes up still. Stated that colonists would have the same liberties, franchises, and immunities as people born in England. So it came with them. The Massachusetts Body of Liberties contains similarities to Clause 29 of the Magna Carta. When drafting it, the Massachusetts General Court viewed Magna Carta as the chief embodiment of English common law. In 1638, Maryland, where I lived for a while, sought to recognize the Magna Carta as part of the law of the province, but the request was denied by King Charles I. Now, that may take us back to that fact that Maryland was established very much as a Catholic state, and that might have been one of the reasons, Charles, I don't know. I'll have to ask him one of these days. But anyway, so we get to British common law, which was sort of brought in here by the people who arrived here at that time. There are obviously other people here, and we'll go into that later. Common law is derived from judicial decisions instead of from statutes. American courts originally fashioned common law rules based on English common law until the American legal system was sufficiently mature to create its own laws, common law rules, and from direct precedent, or analogy to comparable areas of decided law. Enough. So now we move forward to the term social justice. Now I've given you a little bit of history there. So we know where the Constitution came from. So in the introduction, now I'm one of those people who failingly usually don't read introductions to books, but I did read this one and I found it worth reading. Thank you. But in it, the author acknowledges a powerful ideology making deep roads into the heart of the evangelical church. Its ideology is called social justice, and it really means social justice, commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion. Nothing wrong there, right? As Christians, we share a commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion. We use those words. But Christians believe in the Bible or the biblical teaching of how to get there. And it's not the words, it's how do we get there and where do we arrive once we've gotten there. we all share the image of Christ, and the church is called to advance his kingdom in a fallen world. And that fallen world is a world we recognize, but to people who are unchurched, So we believe we can change the world for the better by showing God's transforming love, by loving our neighbors, amen, forgiving others, very important, as God has forgiven us. And God's words to us define what truth, justice, love, and equality mean. And these words have shaped our culture and blessed nations for more than 2,000 years. So even our laws have mirrored these concepts for hundreds of years. So do these words mean the same to everyone? Equality, diversity, and inclusion. So words matter. They shape our ideas. And so what do the advocates of social justice mean when they use these very same words we use? As John Stonestreet, president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, now this is very, very conservative, is fond of saying, it's no good having the same vocabulary if we're using different dictionaries. So that's a point to remember. And our worldviews determine how we think and act. They drive the choices we make. And remember, by their fruit, you will know them. That's in Matthew. And the Bible is used constantly in the book to point out differences between social justice and biblical justice. They are not the same. And it goes on to say many Christians are not immune to these powerful ideas, which have shaped institutions we all share. So many have absorbed the assumption, and he calls it, now I switched it to sort of just social justice. He's called it ideological social justice. But we've switched our views as a culture, some of us anyway, a little bit unawares. So after all, it uses the biblical words and concepts, and yet it also redefines them. So it's the redefinition of what it is. This changing worldview has happened over the past 30 years. It's actually gone on longer than that. It now dominates big business, and we've seen that. It dominates K through 12 education. It dominates higher education, high tech, and much of our government, including our systems, judicial systems. According to cultural critic Andrew Sullivan, we all live on campus now. And I want to add, we all live on campus now, comrade. Phil thinks that's not funny. So if you go back to the philosophies that emerged in Europe, that can be traced back to Kant, Nietzsche, Marx, Gramsci, if I say his name right, I hope, Foucault. Over time, their words have mutated and merged into a school of thought contemporary academics call critical theory, or that the author calls ideological social justice. And it is attracting many adherents who have no knowledge of the Bible. We all need to make sense of our world, and this philosophy makes sense to mostly secular audience. And it's now influencing high tech and a whole sphere of media, a whole sphere of institutions that we come in contact with daily. So social justice does not mean biblical justice. In fact, it's antithetical to it. Words matter, says Scott David Allen, and almost everybody else agrees words matter. So the author asserts that God and his law provide the plumb line by which we can decide the merit of any claims of justice. I'm going to go with that. C.S. Lewis, no less in Mere Christianity, acknowledges that God communicates it inwardly. All people have this innate moral code, a clue to the true meaning of the universe. I believe this is true. Humans the world over have this curious idea they ought to behave in a certain way. And you see Paul's letter to the Romans as an example of that. Consider how important that is. God's moral code, as it were, is written in our hearts. We have absorbed it. God's law through the 10 Commandments delivered to Moses and the Jewish people to us, and is the greatest gift to humanity for all of humanity. It really is. In human history, that is, the Ten Commandments is a great gift. So we have a culture built on justice and mercy. And according to Daniel Webster, justice story is a great interest of people on earth. It is the ligament which holds civilized beings and nations together. And Webster was right. Without justice, human flourishing is impossible. Just societies acknowledge a moral law higher than themselves. Just read the first sentence of the Declaration of Independence, which talks about the laws of nature and nature's God. So now we're beginning to redefine what justice means. If we deny God's existence, we cannot live as if justice does not exist. If we deny God's existence, we cannot live as if justice does not exist. If we deny God's justice, we will create our own moral codes of morality and accept a man-made standard that will be changeable, arbitrary, and beholden to the whims of those in power. Today, an ideology called social justice has radically redefined the popular understanding of justice. It is tearing down of traditional structures and systems deemed to be oppressive, and the redistribution of power and resources from oppressors to victims in pursuit of equality of outcome. And equality of outcome is an impossible thing to reach. You can have equality of opportunity, but you cannot guarantee equality of outcome. The author points to three major shifts in history. Worldview dates prior to the 17th century. Reality was spiritual and material. The supreme authority of God and his word in the Ten Commandments. And modernism, which dates from the 18th to the 20th century, reality was material only and supreme authority was science. In the postmodern world, reality, the human mind, and the supreme authority, the autonomous sovereign self, king. So the problem arises with this is that if all human beings see themselves as autonomous, self-determined agents, how do we govern ourselves? Reality becomes subjective. Liberty, life have been replaced by a new overarching human right, the right to define one's own concept of existence, the meaning of the universe and the mystery of life. So you get to define your own concept of existence. And then, so if each person, the book goes on to say, if each person is a law unto him or herself, on what basis can society be ordered? It leads to social chaos. Every idea except Judeo-Christian theism is accorded a place of honor in the public square, with people no longer sure of their own sex, with vicious hatreds writ large on social media, in the streets and in politics, with irreconcilable differences being the norm. So what are the core tenets of this? Core tenets of Marxism, actually. The good now is oppressed victims morally innocent. Evil is oppressive systems, oppressors morally guilty. The good is the working class, and this is Marxism 101. The working class or proletariat. Evil is capitalism, wealthy property owners, and capitalists, or the bourgeoisie. And if you've read any of Solzhenitsyn or any Russian, you will see this at work. So the Frankfurt School social theorists expanded Marx's economic and class-based framework to include inequalities between other groups, including ethnic groups, the sexes and gender identity groups. The result of these inclusions is the same, and the proposed solution to raise your consciousness becomes aware of yourself as an oppressed group, then to rise up against your oppressor. That's Marxism 102. Good is the oppressed victims, evil, the oppressors. Good is the working class, evil is capitalism, property owners, and the bourgeoisie. So who are we? With Christianity diminishing in Europe and America, what will fill the vacuum? Social justice ideology does everything a religion should. It offers an account of the whole, that human life and society must be entirely as function of social power structures in which various groups have spent all human existence oppressing other groups, and it provides a set of principles to resist and reverse this interlocking web of oppression. Many people have decided that fighting for social justice is a new purpose in their lives. It's become a new religion in a way. The biblical worldview asserts that human beings are creations of a holy, good, and loving God, and that we, both male and female, are made in his image. That's Genesis 1:26-28. Ideological social justice views humans as creatures whose identity is determined by group affiliations, particularly those based on race, sex, gender identity. There is no shared human nature. Even more radical, there is no such thing as the individual. Our identity is socially constructed. Yikes. Anyway, there's a book I have not read. I would like to read it. Finding Truth by Nancy Pierce explains this social justice anthropology. Everyone's ideas are merely social constructions stitched together by cultural forces. Individuals are little more than mouthpieces for communities based on race, class, gender, ethnicity, and sexual identity. Jordan Peterson, his name comes up several times, is a professor of psychology, I believe, at the University of Toronto in Canada. Ideological social justice denies the existence of the individual. It claims that you are an avatar of your group, interests, and powerless to rise above the communities to which you belong. This explains why for LGBTQ plus individuals, their sexual activity isn't viewed as a choice or behavior, but an identity. It's not what I do, it's who I am. If you oppose someone's homosexuality in this view, you are denying his or hers very humanity, akin to a Nazi dehumanizing a Jew or a slaveholder. No, there is no forgiveness for such a person. Now, we can argue that, and I'd like to argue that. That's, never mind. By contrast, the Bible affirms the importance of every individual. And that's the difference. Every individual is made in God's image, no matter what that person is, has the right to forgiveness. And the other view, we are constructs of our group. It's almost a form of tribalism. We're concepts of our group, and we are not important as an individual. And there is no forgiveness for anyone who says differently. You're just chum. That's the view held here. I can say yes to that, and I can say no, he's not right on that. And it's worth reading to inform yourself of what's going on and to make up your own minds. And anyway, the author claims that by denying the existence of the individual and claiming our identity is defined by the groups we belong to, ideological social justice repudiates the essential idea that grounds Western civilization. Let me read that again. By denying the existence of the individual and claiming our identified is defined by the groups we belong to. Ideological social justice repudiates the essential idea that grounds Western civilization. The biblical idea created the West, and nobody can fully imagine the dystopia that would result if we discarded in favor of the dehumanizing idea that individuals don't exist and people are reduced to mouthpieces, drones, or avatars of the groups that define them. That's a lot of mouthful of stuff. But anyway, ideological social justice can only divide because it has no basis for unity. It can segregate us against each other in an endless power struggle. In this worldview, evil doesn't originate in the human heart. There's no doctrine of the fall for human depravity. Rather, evil is sourced outside of man, in society, and specifically in social structures. institutional laws, and cultural norms at the expense of others, particularly people of color, women, or sexual minorities. These interlocking webs of systemic oppression have many labels: white supremacy, toxic masculinity, and the patriarchy, to name a few. So I need a sip of water. So, right, sorry about that. There's a lot to absorb here, and there's a lot that's been going on in the newspapers lately that are worth reading to keep yourselves up to date with the world at large and what's going on, and understand as a Christian where you fit in it. And that's what this book is trying to do. So, but it goes on. For Ta-Nehisi Coates, an Atlantic magazine essayist, our fundamental human problem is whiteness, which he describes as an existential danger to the country and the world. My goodness me. So who are the oppressors? They are those mostly religious conservatives who uphold male-female marriage and the natural family. That is a great shift in human thinking. The ideologies that draw good versus evil line between different groups are not just wrong, they are evil. If this group is good and this group is evil, it's easy to dehumanize the evil group. This is what happened in Nazi Germany with Jews and communist nations with capitalists. It also happened in Rwanda in 1994, which left as many as 1 million Tutsis dead in just 100 days. So the author insists that followers of Jesus Christ must never be complicit in an ideology that encourages the dehumanization of our neighbors, particularly when the dehumanization is based on immutable characteristics such as skin color. Railing against an entire group of people ultimately means rejecting each and every individual in that supposed category, regardless of the personal experience of the human suffering any one of them might have endured as an individual. How is that not the essence of bigotry, it asks? And I recall Hillary Clinton, calling Trump supporters a basket of deplorables. So I didn't like that very much. Despite the best intentions of its adherents, and many do have good intentions, ideological social justice destroys civil, humane society, replacing it with hatred, division, and tribalism. So what do you do about it? There is a way out, but right now we're looking at the revolutionary narrative of social justice. This holds that existing social, cultural, economic systems and institutions are so corrupt by racism that they need to be torn out by the root and make way for a new order. Okay, broad outline of the revolutionary narrative. Systemic injustice and institutional racism. The problems Black people face are sourced outside the Black community. This must change. Colorblindness is a racist sentiment and shows insensitivity to the oppressed. That BLM is an advocacy against rampant police brutality is the most important civil rights movement in America today. This is the revolutionary narrative. It calls for BLM, calls for abolition of the family, mothers and fathers replaced by a form of communalism where children are raised collectively. The abolition of free market capitalism replaced by a form of Marxist collectivism, that society is queer affirming, and I don't like those words, and the expansion of LGBTQ+ rights, the expansion of abortion services in the Black community, and defunding the police. You might consider looking up Susan Wood, Susan Wood's a nonprofit 501c3 solutions consultant who looked into BLM, could not find how the money was spent. And she said, millions are donated and there's no way, no money going into the Black community. And she is herself Black, and she's very upset that none of the money collected has found its way to buy computers for the children who need them, has found its way into the community, Black community at large to help at all. So Anyway, the preservation narrative has deep roots in the Black community, historical forms of it were championed by Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Jackie Robinson, Jesse Owens, Martin Luther King, famous in his I Have a Dream speech. These advocates include Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, former presidential advisor Robert Woodson, economists Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, and author Shelby Steele, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, Vanderbilt political science professor Carol Swain, no relation, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, neurosurgeon Ben Carson, author and activist Alveda King, radio personality Larry Elder, Wall Street Journal columnist Jason Riley, and cultural critic Candace Owens, to name a few of them. The broad line of their narrative is this: personal choice and responsibility, the problem of the Black family and out of wedlock birth rate, which went from 35% in 1970 to 72% today, leading to generations of fatherless children. Since Roe v. Wade, 19 million Black babies were aborted in the United States, 19 million. Blacks trapped in failing schools, the rise of the modern welfare state. And according to them, colorblindness is a cultural achievement to be celebrated, for it frees us from the scourge of tribalism. See Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream. Like all narratives, truth can be found in both, but it's not to say both are equal. How should Christians respond to these two narratives? Well, the author believes our primary obligations is to truth and love. We need to affirm what is good and true and reject what is false and destructive. The other day, I listened to Billy Graham. He was on television, and he is talking about, he is actually espousing the preservation narrative. He couldn't have known that how apt his words were, and that we need to, as Christians, we need to stand up for what we believe in. We need to pray for our neighbors. We need to help raise families, something we can do. We need to feed people. We need to do all the things in mission that we do. We need to do more of it. So why are so many conforming to the revolutionary narrative? Many evangelical institutions confirm to historic statements of faith and doctrine while simultaneously validating and adopting the presuppositions of ideological social justice through language. Is it social pressure to do so? Advocates of the revolutionary narrative claim that unless you accept their worldview, presuppositions, there are a lot of long words in this, you are not simply wrong, you are evil, a racist, sexist, patriarchal, bigot. To remain in their good graces, unquestioned acceptance of their ideology is necessary. Owen Strahan, associate professor of Christian theology at Midwest Baptist Theological, spoke against the temptation. And he writes, in recent decades, evangelicals have thirsted after cultural approval. Like the world's saddest pageant contestants, we want desperately to be accepted by the secular culture. We have exchanged our holy birthright for a Facebook fan page. Our hermeneutic is not motivated by righteous awe, by fear and trembling, by the honor and magnificence of our God. It is driven by a craven desire to be liked, to be culturally acceptable, to be au courant. The church should not be a pruning wannabe. It should recognize that it is a counterculture. We are the city of God, the true city. Excuse me, this is a lot.
It's a lot of talking. You're doing great.
I want questions here, so I'm going to go. Their critics of social justice, perhaps most well known, have been dubbed the intellectual dark web, and they include Jordan Peterson, University of Toronto psychology professor, Jonathan Haidt, a social psychologist at NYU, and Camille Paglia, feminist academic and social critic. This group includes Jews, gays, lesbians. What unites them is a common set of values that run counter to ideological social justice. They include commitments to the following: reason, logic, civil debate, and free and open inquiry in the pursuit of truth. Freedom of speech, association and religion, civility, respect for ideological opponents, and a live and let live ethic of behavior, tolerance, the individual. On matters of race, MLK's credo, Martin Luther King Jr.'s credo, we judge each other on the basis of the content of our character, not the color of our skin. Together, they issued a statement on social justice and the gospel. We are deeply concerned that values borrowed from secular cultures are currently undermining scripture in the area of race and ethnicity, manhood and womanhood, and human sexuality. The Bible's teaching on these subjects is being challenged under the broad, somewhat nebulous rubric of concern for social justice. It is our earnest prayer that our brothers and sisters will stand firm on the gospel and avoid being blown to and fro by the culture trend that seeks to move the Church of Christ off course. Let me see. So offering a better view is a way to perhaps counterculture. When everything is torn down, what will replace it? Someone is always actively impacting culture. If it isn't followers of Jesus, it will be by default those who adhere to another worldview. If we don't like that worldview, we have only ourselves to blame. The best way to drive out bad worldview is by offering a good one. And Christians need to move beyond criticizing culture to create culture. Small things can make big things happen. Are we praying for our country? Are we being good neighbors? Are we God's feet on earth? Do we freely forgive as we are forgiven? And that is it, except I'd like to read you a story by Corrie ten Boom on forgiveness. And if I can find it now, I know I have marked. Oh, come on. Oh, yes, she. Here she goes. This is Corrie ten Boom. I'm sure you're familiar with her. And she was a prisoner of the Nazis during World War II. It was in a church in Munich that I saw him, a balding, heavy-set man in a gray overcoat, a brown felt hat clutched between his hands. People were filing out of the basement room where I had just spoken, moving along the rows of wooden chairs to the rear. It was 1947, and I had come from Holland to defeated Germany with a message that God forgives. And that's when I saw him working his way forward against the others. One moment I saw the overcoat and brown hat, the next a blue uniform and visored cap with its skull and crossbones. It came back with a rush. The huge room with its harsh overhead lights, the pathetic pile of dresses and shoes in the center of the floor, the shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs shod beneath the parchment skin. Betsy, how thin you were. Betsy and I had been arrested for concealing Jews in our home during the Nazi occupation of Holland. This man, God, now in front of me, thrust a fine message for our line. How good it is to know that, as you say, all us are at the bottom of the sea. And I, who had spoken so glibly of forgiveness, fumbled in my pocketbook rather than take that hand. He would not remember me, of course. How could he remember one prisoner amongst thousands of women? But I remembered him and the leather crop swinging from his belt. It was the first time since my release that I had been face to face with one of my captors, and my body seemed to freeze. You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk, he said. I was a god there. No, he did not remember me. But since that time, he went on, I've become a Christian. I know that God has forgiven me for the cruel things I did there. But I would like to hear it from your lips as well, Fraulein. Again, the hand came out. Will you forgive me? As I stood there, I whose sins had every day to be forgiven and could not. Betsy had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply for the asking? It could have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out, but to me it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I had ever had to do. And I still stood there with the coldness clutching my heart. But forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that too. Forgiveness is an act of will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Jesus, help me, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand, I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulders, raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands. And then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried, with all my heart. That ended the lesson. I'd like to have some questions.
All right. Hold on 1 second. Let me see if I can, let me make the camera. Did it work? I'm gonna start talking. Did it work? Dang it. All right, I'm gonna, hold on, give me 1 second. Oh, okay, I can do it. We'll just take a breath, consider your questions, and I'm gonna see if I can get it to. I've done this before. Nope, that's not it. Well, it's gonna.
Well, while you're looking, let me just say something. We get the Sun Journal. Everybody get that? Well, I mean, not everybody. I mean, a lot of people don't. On May 29th, on US history, we should all be woke. And I read this and I thought, well, I'm not going to like this. And then I read it. And what he's really talking about is history. We need to know the good and the bad. Children need to be taught the good and the bad of their culture, of their country. And there isn't a country could name probably that hasn't done some really wicked things to its citizens in the past. Mm-hmm. And children need to be taught this. But they also need to be taught to love their country at the same time. We all have faults. Our country has some huge ones. And so does every country. And Germany recently, I think a few days ago, maybe a week ago, apologized for something it did when it was in colonial Africa. It had massacred some natives there.
A genocide, yeah.
Yeah, committed a genocide, and it apologized after all these years. And that will help.
Well, yeah.
That's forgiveness.
Yeah. Well, so I'm gonna,
please.
As the moderator, I'm gonna take privilege. And I got two questions.
Yeah.
So the one I was curious, so it sounded like there was a lot, you spoke a lot about sort of the re-examining or the redefinition of the idea of social justice, right? Which is much in the air at the moment. But I was curious if you could speak more to, I didn't get a sense of what he meant when he said the word biblical justice, right? Because that in itself needs a bit of definition and explanation.
He has all the way through the book, he quotes.
Right. So what, because I was saying biblical justice, depending on what parts you read, can be quite, you chop off a hand for someone who steals something, right? So
he's not going there, and
so that's what I'm curious what he means by biblical justice, because when you put biblical,
it's a gentle view.
I would say if you put biblical before anything, like biblical womanhood, biblical, you do. You have to be careful how you
define the Old Testament
it.
or the New Testament.
Well, right. Yes. So
and by Deuteronomy, or
right, for sure. So like, how would
remember Jesus' teaching? So
we're really only focusing on
a lot more focus on it does, including the Ten Commandments. There is a history there that we need to understand, the Old Testament and the New Testament, but we're talking about Jesus and a Christian church, a Jesus believing church, and he's also talking about very evangelical churches, which
are
not
a particular flavor of approach. Yes. That's what I was kind of asking, like how he understood.
And that's where he's coming from.
Sure.
That's a little more conservative than I am,
Mhm.
but it's out there, and these churches are huge, and they have a great influence on the culture,
Right.
and they're beginning to include the terminology, and I'm hoping they understand the meaning of the
Well,
words.
it sounds like they may mean something different than
They
like
might,
perhaps like any
yeah.
other, you know.
Yeah,
how-
and I haven't been
Right.
to their services, I don't know what they mean
Right,
by
right,
that, but I
right.
hope they take the time to learn,
Hmm.
Well,
So
to make themselves aware.
For example, if you follow the 10 Commandments,
Mm.
thou shalt not kill. 19 million aborted black babies
Mm.
and all the others, thou shalt not steal. Today it is, some are saying that it is all right to loot.
right. So I don't want to get, honestly,
No,
I don't want to go down this route at
Yeah,
this
but
point in
that
the
is-
conversation.
It's brought up in the
Right. Oh, wait. Oh, one more. Privilege. Hold on. Privilege. Oh, Wendy. Yeah, what's up?
So I finished reading the book this week also, and I thought it was excellent. I mean,
I read it too.
it really makes you think. But my understanding of the basic difference between how he interprets social justice or ideological social justice and biblical social justice is you look at the fruits. And his intention is that the road that we're going down with this ideological social justice seems to be producing fruits that are destructive, that are tearing apart society, that are destroying relationships, and that are exacerbating hostility. And you can see that across your kitchen table. You can see that in our congregation. You can see that on the streets. He says that is not biblical justice. No matter how much they call it justice, that is not biblical justice because it's not producing biblical fruits. And so you have to then consider, you know, what the biblical fruits are of justice. And those are things that build people up, that cause people to prosper, that spread forgiveness, as you know, Janet emphasized in her last story that she read. And that's basic contention, how you can separate the two is by looking at the fruits.
Yeah.
And
So
he does mention Matthew in that, so the fruits you will know them. So.
sure. Okay. So my other question is, you know, so like with these books, we ask the presenters to share about books that have sort of impacted them spiritually, have spoken to their faith or helped them to see things. So I'm curious for you how reading this book has sort of
how reading this book
has informed your faith or
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, it makes me, after reading this, which is quite disturbing in some ways, in a lot of ways, to be more mindful of the words I use.
Oof, yes.
They are important. And to be open to discussion. I would like discussion. There's nothing wrong with discussion. Phil and I have often talked about the First Amendment, the things you can say and not say. And I say you can say it all. I say it and discuss it, you know, and if I don't like it,
Okay,
then
again, I don't want to, don't do sidebars because they can't hear her.
I believe strongly in the First Amendment. We should be able to speak the truth as we see it freely, and our truth as we see it. We should be allowed to say anything we want to say. Let's hear your words. Let's open up discussion. I may disagree with you, you know, vehemently and hate every word you've said, but say it. And let's learn from it. There's usually something in there that we can learn from, even if we think it's hate-filled. It's coming from somewhere. That's a human being talking to us. So that's what I got from this. Be careful.
I have something to say.
Yeah, you have a question. Well, so
Not of course.
Oh, okay. No, you can. No, go ahead. I was gonna say. I would say you might move a little bit closer so folks can hear you. That's move a little closer so folks can
The
hear you.
whole thing is, to me, is that the human race is getting away from the Bible because the Bible talks about all of these changes are going to take place. It's the human heart, and I mean that's all races, all people. That's what the problem is. We're getting away from the Bible. The Bible tells us how to get along and to love one another. The Bible also tells us that we're to people that are over us, we're supposed to listen and and obey, something like that. I read it some time ago, but it doesn't mean like slavery, but
No.
this is from
You
the
respect
Bible.
your leaders.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to
Jesus
say.
is head of all. So
Exactly.
yeah.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole problem to me is that we're just getting away from the Bible. And this is what is happening. As a Christian, you can't go out and say but so much, because people will get very angry with you and it will actually hurt you. So, I mean, as a Christian, you can't do but so much. I think on a small level, we are doing a lot of things, but we can't go but so far because we're human, and
we
the world
don't want to get beaten up either.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
There are ways to say things, and sometimes I ran across it the other night. I was going to swallow it, but I didn't. And I just muttered something under my breath, but I think it was heard, and that's all right. But it wasn't the place, and here, that's funny. It wasn't the place to say something. So when is it the place to say something? I thought about that.
The Bible teaches us to turn the other cheek too a lot of times. You can't always speak your mind. I mean, if you speak your mind all the time, you can get in trouble or get hurt or get killed, really tell the truth.
What we can do is make sure when we vote, we know what we're voting for, study everybody who's running. I'm an independent, so I choose, so I read their backgrounds and go into everything I can to find out. And actually, sometimes there's not a whole lot they put out there. Yeah. And sometimes they didn't put anything out there. And you really go, where's your background?
Okay. I see Jim is yeah. We acknowledge you, Jim. Go ahead.
I mean, I guess my broad question is, I've not read the book yet. I have added it to my Kindle. I'm glad to hear Wendy say she also found the book very rewarding. I mean, I guess what I was, just by reading the book title, what I was expecting to see was something a little different than the presentation I've heard, but that may just be because that's what we focused on, Janet. So, I mean, I was hoping to see some sort of like some wrestling with biblical text, looking at the Torah, looking at the prophets, looking at the gospel, looking at the epistles, and wrestling that with some social justice premise. And I guess I was viewing this as a much broader social justice premise. I mean, Friedrich von Hayek's got a deconstruction of social justice in an excellent chapter in the Constitution of Liberty. I was expecting that sort of, high level wrestling. Because to me, at its base, biblical justice has to be about social justice. This back 70% of the Decalogue is expressly. What we recite at church every Sunday in the second great commandment is expressly. Some conception of social justice has to be a part of biblical justice. And so what I'm hearing a bit more, I think, is sort of a broadside against certain trends in academia and modern American thought and politics. And I would probably agree with a substantial percentage of those attacks, but I'm not seeing the dots squared, and I'm not sure that a sort of, I guess what Wendy was saying was this is something that's, it's an empiricist based critique, but I'm not sure that concords, that really meshes with the concept of biblical justice and conceptually that, I think it does, but an anti-revolutionary critique doesn't accord with Moses or the prophets or Jesus or Paul in my reading. B, I'm not sure that we can judge the long-term fruits here. I tend to agree with the critique. I tend to agree with the fact that the empiricism will ultimately leave some of these concepts and some of these approaches and methodologies hollow, but I don't know that that's inherently the case or demonstrably the case, if that makes sense, as opposed to, there's certain other areas of policy where I have more confidence, but maybe I'm missing something in the book.
So he's not a theologian. So he really doesn't come at it from that perspective. I think and Janet, correct me if you disagree with me, but my sense was his push is to get us to understand the language and to clarify by the language it's being used, and to take back language that traditionally we as Christians have used that has been appropriated for other purposes with other results. It's kind of like, you know, I grew up in an evangelical church, and for the last 30 years, I have been irate that other people have hijacked that word and turned it into something bad. When, you know, my whole life, it was something that I treasured. That's sort of the road that he's going down with this idea of justice. He says, God tells us what justice is. You know, there may be some subtleties in the biblical text, but the word justice has been taken over by another group now, and the definition has changed in the last 20 or 30 years in front of our very eyes. And that's where the objection is from the author, I think.
That's beautifully said. And it is about words, and it is about understanding what we're seeing and reading, so we can interpret for ourselves. It's not, he's not a theologian, but he does give enough, when you read the book, quotes from the Bible to point us back to the biblical reasons and what we should, how we should live our lives biblically. Now, is that always possible? No. But we can try, and he gives enough examples of that. But it's really about culture, words, and appropriation of the words. So when I started with the Magna Carta, I wanted to give an understanding where the words that we're using have seeped into our culture. And so, and why they're important, and in the Declaration of Independence, and where we are today, and how things, how words have been used differently. So maybe that didn't come across enough, but
well, it's hard to summarize that in an hour.
Anyway, so I hope you read it.
It seems very America focused. Am I right in that?
Who?
I think Carl wanted to say something.
Go ahead, Jim. What was that? Oh,
it seems very America focused. The book, not as universal. You know, it doesn't seem like it's drawing on continental European tradition or Roman Catholic thinking or other things or Eastern tradition.
It is, but of course this is going on all over the world too, Western cultures.
All right, so we've got 1 minute. Anyone have something they can say in 1 minute?
There's another book called Hope of Nations that actually the last few chapters tell you how to live in this world. Things we can do as Christians to be able to live in this world.
He's explaining the problem, and he's using the Bible, and he's not really telling us how to change it. We should speak up and we should do this. And there are things we can do as individuals, but we're not going to, well, we can back politicians who share our view if we want to.
In Hope of Nations, it doesn't talk about politics, but it talks about how as Christians, you can be gentle and open to hearing all views and live as an example.
When I believe that...
Okay, folks, it's Car, is that you?
Yes, hi.
We put really, it, gotta go.
Okay, all right. We put it in the chat.
Okay, very good. You did, thank you. They put a book recommendation in the chat for folks. I'll lift it up for you guys. Recommendation, High Conflict, Why We Get Trapped and How Do We Get Out by Amanda Ripley. So thank you for that. This is the benefit of read this book. It's like it generates like it makes more book babies for you to read. So all right, good. All right, thank you all. We're at time. I'm trying to remember. Wendy, you're going next week, yes? Do you want to give us a minute preview?
So those of you who know me know I've loved my memoirs, particularly from young Christian women. And just about every year I'll do a memoir of some sort. Well, this year I discovered an author that I had never heard about. And she actually has 3 books that are memoir. And the title of one of them is a bit provocative, but she is an excellent writer. And I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to know her over the course of the last year. And I'm really excited to share these 3 books with you.
This is, yeah, so 3 books in one, but they're all like, it's all a series. Yes, like Wendy, they're all related, the 3 books.
They're different parts of her life.
Okay.
Okay, good. We haven't had yeah, something quite like that. So that's exciting. All right, thank you all. I'm gonna shut it down. Bye to Zoom world. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, put that in your book. Thank you.